anything that the graduation speaker says. I can't even remember who spoke at my graduation, let alone what they said. But there is a reason for that. Graduation is not about what someone says. It is about what you have done, and that is as it should be. You will not remember what is said here today, but you will always remember this day and how you felt. Graduation day is one of life's great crossroads. For nearly all your life, you have been a student. For the last 4 years, a student at AU. But today, all that changes. From this day forward, you are no longer a student. You are a graduate of the American University, and that is a nice ribbon, doesn't it? And that brings us to the next part. Now what? I wouldn't be honest if I told you it is going to be easy to find a job. Many of you are obviously going into some part of the field of communications. I don't have to tell you, we are in the midst of a communications revolution that is moving at warp speed. Newspapers are failing, not for journalistic reasons, but for economic reasons. And the big question is not really whether newspapers can continue to be printed on paper. Frankly, no one knows. The technology will decide whether we get newspapers on the iPad or over our wristwatch or on paper. But the larger and the more important question is, can they find the sources of revenue to support the staffing that is required to produce the kind of product that we have come to expect from the mainstream media? And that is basically that we don't publish or broadcast anything until we have made every effort to determine if it is true. That takes editors, that takes reporters that still hew to the standards we now expect from the mainstream media. So if you are heading into journalism, I can't tell you where you'll be working, website, cable, broadcast, or newspaper. But I know this, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise, there will always be a need for accurate, independently gathered information. And as long as there is that need, there's going to be a need for someone to go out and gather that information, reporters. We simply cannot have democracy without that. The difference in a totalitarian society and a democracy is, in a totalitarian society, there is only one source of news, the government. In a democracy, we have independently gathered information from an independent press that gives its citizens a second source of information that they can check against the government's version of events and decide which version to believe. If there's no other reason for a free press, that is reason enough. So when people ask me, will there be a need for journalists? I say yes, there has to be. Because without independently gathered information, you cannot have democracy. It is as vital to a democracy as our right to vote. As for what that job is, I can't say, but I know you have to find it. It won't come looking for you. And who knows? You might get lucky. Luck always plays a part in our lives. For what I generally found over the years was that the harder I worked, the luckier I got. Let me tell you, this is a true story. When you're out there knocking on doors and you get kind of discouraged, I knocked on a lot of doors when I was a young reporter. I tried for 5 years to get a job at one of the networks, and one day in desperation, I walked into the CBS News Bureau down at 2020 M Street here in Washington without an appointment. The reason I went without an appointment is because I'd never been able to get an appointment. I went there and I told the first person I saw, I'm Bob Schieffer and I've come to see Mr. Small about a job. He was the bureau chief. Well, to my surprise, the woman said, oh yes, Bob, come right in. I was ushered into the bureau chief's office for an interview that led to me being hired. Only later, this is the truth, only later did I learn that I had walked in on another person's appointment. It was a reporter named Bob Hager, who would go on to have a long and good career at NBC. When I said Bob Schieffer, the woman just got her Bobs mixed up and thought I was Bob Hager. So I am the only person ever hired at CBS, and they thought I was somebody else. So you can just keep knocking on those doors. speed, getting stuff fast, I'm also afraid we get a little impatient. We want whatever we want it now. That is not what this country is built on. What this country is built on is our resolve and our courage and our ability to set a goal and to never, ever get up. When those terrorists attacked this country 10 years ago, and I was here, like many of you were, here in Washington, I saw it all happen. They thought we didn't have the stomach for it. They didn't think we were in it for the long haul. They didn't think that we could stick with it. But you know something? We sent the world a message this week. We do. We don't give up. When we are wrong, when our people are mistreated, we don't give up until we find the culprit and bring them to justice. And that's what we tell. We send a powerful message to the world this week. 9/11 is engraved in my memory. I was here. I saw it unfold. My daughter lived in Manhattan. She was missing for most of that morning, but it turned out she was fine. My brother had been at the Pentagon on the Friday before that attack, in the very room where the plane hit. Had the attack been on a Friday instead of a Tuesday, he would have been killed. You don't forget a day like that. But for all those memories of that day, it was the day after 9/11 that I will remember most of all, because on that day, we saw truly remarkable things. I covered Congress in those days, and as I drove to the Capitol the day after 9/11, it dawned on me suddenly there was no road rage. People were waving at each other. People honked. We had been through an awful thing, and we had survived it together. Congress had been in some kind of a row about something, but that day, whatever the argument was about, it seemed meaningless. The Senate and the Congress that day passed a $40 billion emergency appropriation bill, and they passed it unanimously. And I shall never forget that when the Republican leader of the Senate, Trent Lott, walked out with his Democratic counterpart, Tom Daschle, they walked out to announce this to the microphones, and he put his arm around his counterpart. It was one of the most touching things that I have ever seen. People said the country had come together as it had never come together, but I knew better, because I had been a child during World War II, and I could remember when the world had come together, because we were all in it together, and our parents had come together to defeat Nazism, surely the worst menace that had ever settled upon the earth. They knew that unless they defeated this awful thing, the world was on the verge of a new dark age. And so their generation realized that, and they did what they had to do to get it done. Sadly, within months after 9/11, we somehow let that feeling of unity slip away. And we find ourselves now in Washington that in recent months has been more partisan and just downright meaner than I can recall in my 42 years here in Washington. Which brings me to this. Since the successful conclusion of this mission to bring Osama bin Laden to justice, I sense a revival of the spirit of togetherness that we all felt in those days after 9/11. If our leaders can just seize this moment, I believe they can use it as a way to come together and to get Washington running again in a way that can make us all proud. We've done that before. We can do it again. They and we must at least try. You know, you're going to go out into the workforce and into the world outside American University's campus. It's very complicated, but I want you to remember something. There have always been problems, and we have always found a way. I don't know a lot, but some of the things that I've come to believe in more than 42 years of watching Washington and covering Washington, some of the things that I think are true I would like you to focus on today and think about at the end of this very wonderful week. And that is to think about what it is that makes our country so strong. What is our true strength? We remember first, it is not our weapons, but our values that are the core of our real strength, the foundation on which our country rests. The values that you were taught here, the values that my parents instilled in me and your parents passed on to you. America leads best when we lead by example. Hubert Humphrey famously said that the Civil Rights Act of 1964 was the single most effective foreign policy initiative of the second half of the 20th century. It had nothing to do with foreign policy. It simply told the world who we were, how we treated one another, and it demonstrated that our system works. During the Cold War, we built the greatest arsenal of weapons the world has ever known, and that arsenal kept the Soviet Union at bay. But it did not win the Cold War. The war was won when the people in the East, on the other side of the Iron Curtain, looked across and saw that the people in the West had a better life, and they wanted some of it. And they realized that their government was not able to produce it for them. And so the wall came down. They didn't want guns and rockets. They wanted washing machines and television sets and good schools for their children. It was the values, Western values, that won in the end the Cold War. Our greatest security comes when people have a good understanding of who we are, and we must always remember to practice what we preach. America is and always has been about fairness, about family, and about taking care of one another, even when it isn't easy. Remember always what Ed Murrah used to say, that we are not descended from fearful people. Those who came here were optimists, who were not afraid to cross an ocean, and once they got here, were not afraid to cross a great continent in covered wagons for no other reason than to find a better life for their children. That is who we are, and as long as you remember that, you will be all right, and this country will remain secure. So I say to you today, do your best, set your expectations high, and remember always that true greatness comes not from the battles we win, but the battles we choose to fight. I thank you. The world needs you. God bless you.